How's everybody doing? Good? All right, thanks for making it back from lunch. This is Public Engagement is People, which is only a joke title if you're of a certain age. Otherwise, it is a random picture of Charlton Heston for no reason, and that's okay. So today I am going to talk a lot about context, or what I call the things that aren't the thing, right? And so as an example, let's take a look at my presentation, right? My presentation is the thing. The things that aren't the thing are, for example, all of you, because every one of you comes into this room with your own preconceived notions, your own perspective, your own ideas, right? I can't control any of that. And then another thing that's not the thing is me. You know, chances are most of you, if not all of you, have no idea who I am. And so you don't know whether I have any credentials. You have no idea whether I have any experience. So there is absolutely no level of initial trust for us to have an exchange of ideas other than I ended up here for some reason, so perhaps. But let's clear up that first hurdle, and I'll tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Scott Doyon. I'm a partner with PlaceMakers, which is an urban design firm, but I am not an urban designer. My background and my education are in communications. And so my job with PlaceMakers is essentially a translator between designers who say wonky things that nobody can understand and regular people who speak normally. So I'm an interface between those things and trying to take things that are very silo-oriented and turn them into something that people can recognize, understand, and see their place in. But I wasn't always in the service of placemaking. Initially, prior to my work with Place, I was a less handsome version of this guy. And I was working for one of the largest ad agencies in the world, and I was serving Fortune 500 clients with brand marketing initiatives. And it's there in that work that I started to discover and learn about the art of not talking about the things you want to say, but talking about the things that your audience needs to hear. And that's a distinction that I'm going to come back to later. But the point is that after about 12 years, I hit a point that a lot of ad men hit. And that's where you're suddenly in your 30s and you're thinking, do I want to be an ad man for the rest of my life? And some people say yes to that question. But my problem was that I was investing all of my strategic and creative competencies into helping people sell goods and services that oftentimes I really didn't care about very much. You know, that's not on them. They were all perfectly good companies, perfectly good people. That's on me. But the point was, I didn't really believe in it, right? So it just so happened about that time I stumbled upon an article about Seaside, Florida, which at the time was in its infancy. And I was kind of fascinated by the idea, so I started reading more. And in reading more, I started to engage more, and I started to meet people and discover that there was this emerging movement of people who were all trying to create better places for people to live. And then suddenly that sounded to me like, oh, well, that's like an endeavor, a product, if you will, that I could really devote myself to and feel good about it. So my question was, you know, what are all these people about? You know, every corporation that you work for has a mission statement of some kind, and they tend to ramble on and all sound roughly the same. And so if I were to come up with a mission statement that defines PlaceMakers, it would be the Athenian Pledge, which is to transmit this place greater, better, stronger, prouder, and more beautiful than it was transmitted to us. You know, that's the kind of mission that I could devote my life to and feel pretty good about it. So I said, that's what I'm going to do. But then the question is there actually a need for what I know how to do within this niche, within this industry? And I was quite pleased to find out very, very soon that there absolutely was. And I had to think about it for a while. I said, why why are these folks in placemaking not getting traction? Why are these ideas not working? What's the problem? What I figured out after I started meeting all these people is that all the people are so passionate and they're so filled with ideas, and they're all trained as generalists, so they think about the big picture, and they have all this. And what that adds up to is people who are 100% confident that they know exactly what they want to talk about. And all they focus on is how to get the word out. I know what I want to talk about, but how do I get the word out? Now, I'm here to tell you today that how you get the word out when you're dealing with an audience, you're dealing with the public, is pretty much the last thing you need to be thinking about. When you're thinking about a process, right? This is a process I call context-sensitive communications. I call it that only because so many people within this realm are familiar with context-sensitive design. You know, you get that idea that you can't just design in a vacuum. Well, you can't communicate in a vacuum either. There's a process that takes you moving from left to right, starting with you and what you're trying to accomplish. And then there's the baggage associated with you or associated with what you're trying to do. And then there are the assets that are available to you at your disposal. Then there's the audience you're going to be speaking with. Then there's the message of what you're going to say. And then finally, it's how to get the word out. So let's start with you, all right? What exactly are you trying to accomplish? This seems like a really simple question, but it's not, especially with people involved in place. Because what you find is, like, I'll take New England, for example, right? So a lot of people, like, one of the things they're trying to do is advance the ideas of new urbanism in New England, right? But the specific thing they're trying to do is get a bike lane built, for example. So if you're trying to get a bike lane built, what exactly is the value of equating it or talking about it in the context of new urbanism to regular people who don't know what that is? Every time you introduce a new concept to people that they have to understand in order to understand the next thing you're talking about, you lose them. So what are you really trying to accomplish? If you're trying to get a bike lane built, then that's the only thing you need to be concerned about, right? Saving the world, tackling global warming, advancing new urbanism, all of those things, what you're working on may play a small role in advancing those bigger ideas, but that's nothing you need to be talking about. You're trying to get a bike lane built, right? Next is the baggage associated with what you're trying to do. Here is something that I find, at least in the communities where we work, that people don't think about, and that is, what happens when the person who is trying to get something done has believability problems, has trust problems? You know, what if it's a very progressive planner in a relatively conservative community that has butt heads with the community numerous times before? Well, should that person really be the champion out there? Because suddenly the message is lost in the distrust that people already have for that person. So I would encourage everyone, when considering that baggage, to think in terms of who could overcome it, right? Maybe there's somebody on council who has a level of trust, but who also believes in what you're trying to do. That doesn't mean the person owns the project, but maybe they're the person who speaks for the project, right? So they bring less baggage to the process. Or perhaps, you know, the process itself is the result of a lot of fights in the community. You know, that, before you even think about what to say or how to get the word out, you have to work your way around that. You can't just ignore it and expect that it's not going to be a huge barrier between you and doing the thing that you're specifically trying to do, right? Next are the assets, such as, how does the project fill a need or demonstrate what we've been asked to do? One of your greatest advantages in a public process is if you can tie what you're doing to some recognized instance where people asked you to do that, right? That's why communities that do comprehensive planning or do strategic planning and have big community-wide visioning sessions, that's the value in that, because then down the line, you know, people's people's fear meters start peaking when they say, where did this come from? Who's suddenly talking about this, right? So you need to be able to say, well, this is your government being responsive to you, because this is what the community asked us to do. We can talk about the details of exactly how we're going to do it, but we're not going to have any need to talk about whether or not it should be done. That was already decided, and the community agreed upon that. You know? What else can be leveraged? Are there other people in the community doing other work that you can bring into the fold? Sometimes these might be people who aren't in a leadership position with the city from an elected standpoint or a city hall standpoint, but they might be business leaders who are respected, and these people can lend their voice. And suddenly, you're getting assets that can overcome the baggage that you're inherently going to have to some degree. Then finally, we start talking about your audience. All right? Here's the thing, right? People can be awesome. Lots of people are awesome. They can also be sort of terrible, right? That's the duality of human beings, right? We're capable of just tremendous character and great empathy, and at the same time, we're capable of just petty nonsense, just the pettiest nonsense in the world. And that's what makes us so interesting, right? But that doesn't mean just because you're getting the word out that those dynamics don't exist, right? People, they're suspicious. They are fearful of change. They don't like things just happening, and then they're very vocal about those opinions, right? We've seen all this stuff, like these people, they are concerned about light rail. These people are concerned about heavy rail, right? These people don't want bike lanes. These people do want bike lanes, right? These people don't want a parking lot turned into a neighborhood restaurant. These people don't want apartments nearby. I don't know if you can see that, but their logo there is a monstrous apartment building, just literally with huge teeth devouring little houses. Right? These people, they're glad you're their neighbor, regardless of where you're from. However, if you're opening a business down the street, then no. Sorry. Okay? Too much density, crazy density, right? These people, not enough density. They need more. They need places to live, right? There's people who are against things that are universally accepted as not being good, right? Or these, but then there's people against things that perhaps could be good. But what it all boils down to is, a fear of change and a desire that nothing change ever. That's inherent in people. And that's why I talk so much about your baggage and your assets, so you can understand how to overcome that absence of trust that exists with people when you're trying to do things. Because one thing for sure is that people are not afraid of being hyperbolic about a situation. Right? The way, what it all adds up to is this. My partner and I, Ben Brown, working in communities around the country, we've seen the character types repeat themselves so often that I made these trading cards that I call the heroes of public process, right? And these are the 6 archetypes that show up all the time at public meetings, right? You've got the no change ever, this ruins everything guy. You've got the congestion-phobic, everything will be a traffic nightmare person, right? And then also, you got the single-issue advocate who just can't think out of the one little box that they need to think to, and becomes their own kind of problem because they support what you're doing if you're doing the one thing that they want done. But then they can't ever see the connection between some other thing that you're doing and the one thing they want done. Or developers are evil, we're all familiar with her, right? And the government watchdog, who's just inherently lacking in trust of anything that has been touched by government. And of course, the helicopter parent, who frames everything, regardless of what you're wanting to do, as having some negative impact on the children. So, I've worked in places where all 6 cards got played in the course of the week. But what it all adds up to is the usual suspects suck the air out of public process. And yet, we let them dominate the discourse and set the terms of engagement. Why are we doing that, right? They're not they're not coming into the process for a meaningful collaboration in order to accomplish something, right? And so what we end up with is, right, for NIMBYs, it's a fear of change plus an absence of trust adds up to impenetrable cynicism, right? So think about that the next time you're trying to get something done and trying to convince something. I didn't choose that word impenetrable lightly. It's impenetrable. So why are you trying to penetrate it, right? Or for advocates, you know, they have passionate energy with a myopic focus, which can add up to an off-putting sense of special interest, right? That can be a bad thing. I'll tell you a quick story. In my town, our last strategic planning session in 2000, hugely attended, got a real culture of planning in my town. One of the things that was asked for was a better network of bicycle facilities. So the government's slowly chipping away at this one project at a time. And the one that's coming up now is a cycle track on a primary thoroughfare that's going to involve the reduction of a lane, right? If the city government had just come forth and said, this is the next phase, and what you've asked us to do, we're fulfilling the goals of the strategic plan, there will be inconvenience, but good news, we're getting done what you asked us to do. Then I think it probably would have sailed through without much of a problem. But instead, for reasons I can't explain, they engaged the bicycle community. And the bicycle community got overly enthusiastic, and then they started advocating on something that was essentially already a done deal, right? It would have happened. It didn't need any advocacy. It was on its way to them signing the contracts and the checks to have it done. And so what happened? Something that was perceived as good government, doing what you asked us to do, turned into a boondoggle to serve a special interest, right? It changed everybody's perspective because they were just so tired of getting beaten over the head with righteous bike talk. And so that changed the dynamic. All of this is hugely demoralizing in terms of, is this really what public process is? Well, why would anybody ever ask the public about anything, right? Well, brothers and sisters, I am here with the good news. And the good news is that you're not just involved in public process, right? If you're trying to get things done, you are involved in political process. And that process works more like this, what I call the spectrum of temperament. On one side, you do have your rabid NIMBYs, and on the other side, you do have your rabid advocates. But the good news is that political processes are won and lost by this huge area in the middle that is filled with generally reasonable people, right? They're still people. They're still capable of great things and petty things, but they are reasonable. They can be worked with, right? And so that's your audience, right? We're talking about audience. That is your audience, right? And you focus there, and your goal is to simply be so reasonable that the extremes will discredit themselves just by opening their mouths, right? So they become unreasonable, and the reasonable people in the middle say, well, I understand they're all mad about this, but they're not willing to engage at all. You know, let's have a conversation about this. Let's talk about it. And so the people in the middle, they still have the fears and the distrust, and they have all those things that the people at the extremes have, but they're pliable, right? So you meet their fear of change, if they have it, with the meaningful prospect of relevant benefit, right? And I say relevant benefit because I've lost count of how many times I've heard a planner dealing with a citizen who, for example, doesn't want commercial encroachment near their home or something. And the planner will say, it's okay because this will add vibrancy, all right? Well, that's a benefit if you want vibrancy. If you're trying to isolate yourself and want to keep things quiet, there's no benefit to vibrancy. So that's why I say relevant benefit, thinking like your audience, right? What's in it for them? Right? Certainly there's something in it for them, right? Then you meet any absence of trust by setting realistic expectations, right? And doing what you say you're going to do. Some of you may come from communities where government has done a very good job of this. They listen, They plan, they set out strategic goals, and then they do them. Others might live in places where every action seems more arbitrary, which immediately makes people more fearful. And so, you got to start somewhere, especially if you're in that latter type of community. You got to start somewhere, and it involves that first project where you set a realistic expectation, and then you do what you say you're going to do. And then the next time around, you, as a spokesperson for what you're trying to do, is not baggage, it's an asset. Because the last time you did what you said you were going to do, right? Meet people's passionate energy with legitimate ways to contribute, right? If people are psyched to get involved, you can't dismiss that. You gotta harness that energy, put it to use. And a lot of people, if they're excited about what you're trying to do, they don't have to be the bike advocates in my town who, were not aware that they were involved in a political process. You can find ways to make those people feel useful. And then if they have a myopic focus, just go with consistent reminders of the big picture, right? It's not just a bike lane. Bike lane is just one part of a bigger picture of more opportunity for more people, more lifestyle opportunities, more economic opportunities, right? That's your bigger picture. And so once you've done all this and you start to crawl inside the head of your audience and try to respectfully understand what they need your project to be, then and only then can you start thinking about what you're going to say. And still, after all this, me going on, we still haven't gotten to how to get the word out, right? Now we're thinking about what to say. And this is the part of the presentation where I really wish I could just tell you, this is what you say. This works in every community, it's tried and true, no problem, but that would kind of be the exact opposite of what I've spent my time trying to tell you about how everything is so context dependent, right? It's your context. You're the expert in where you are. You've been through it. So just to summarize messaging, it's a focused idea presented credibly in a compelling way, right? A focused idea. That was our step one, right? What are you really trying to do? Not all the other things you care about, just that one thing that you're really trying to do. Presented credibly, right? That's the whole idea of the spokesperson. That's the minimization of baggage and the maximization of assets, right? In a compelling way. That's crawling inside the mind of your audience and treating them as human beings who have legitimate dreams and legitimate fears and trying to figure out how what you're doing connects with those things in some positive way. So I'll give you an example which is highly speculative, but right, here's business as usual. This is the kind of thing I see all the time when I'm researching what communities are doing, right? We're updating our zoning with a form-based code. Join us to provide your input. That's pretty standard messaging in a community. But let's dissect this a little bit, right? We're updating our zoning. That implies a problem, right? So the first question is, why? Why are you updating the zoning? What's the problem, right? Zoning protects us. Zoning protects us from things. Why are we updating it, right? And then you say, with a form-based code. So what you've done is provided a solution that they have no idea what it is to a problem they didn't even know that they had. And then you ask them to come bring their input. Well, the only input they have in a situation like that is that they're fearful that something's going on and they have to come give you an earful, right? So I've only worked in Maine once. I'm not going to pretend to have any clue how things work around here. So this is speculative, but an alternate context-sensitive frame would be, we're exploring development solutions that let Maine be Maine. Join us to help identify exactly what that is, right? So consider yourself in the recipient, right? Exploring development solutions also implies a problem, but lay people recognize when there's development they don't like, right? It's either sprawling or it's the wrong thing in the right place. So people say, oh, I have valid opinions on that. I can see why we would want to explore development solutions that are better, and especially ones that let us be who we are. And if there's one thing I am as a citizen, it's an expert in what we are, because this is my home, and I live here. So I would be more than happy to. So what you're doing is you are empowering people to come talk about what they do know about instead of infuriating them and inviting them to talk about what they don't want know about, right? And so this is the point, okay, where you thought through, okay, now I have a way to connect with them where I'm not inciting their fear, I'm leveraging their expertise and trying to bring those generally reasonable people into the fold to have a conversation, right? You know, the planners in the room, you know that coming out of this process where people say, well, what constitutes Maine character? Let me tell you my perspective, right? That's people telling stories about what they know. But for the planner, that's the data, right? If you're doing form-based coding, that's what sets the metrics for setbacks and parking and all the other things. You glean that from the stories that people tell, right? So they don't know they're giving you data. They think they're just, you know, giving you their perspective, and you're receiving it in a way that's respectful, right? Now you're at the point, finally, where you can think about how to get the word out. And again, it's context dependent, so I don't want to give you, this is how you get the word out, kind of a thing. But suffice it to say, meet people where they are, right? Don't try to get people to do things the way you want them to do. You got to do it where they are, right? You have to, just like we've met them from a messaging standpoint, you have to engage them from a similar standpoint. So, you know, for example, there's going to be public meetings, but don't have public meetings where, you know, the idea is that people are being involuntarily educated. Nobody wants to be involuntarily educated. They want to express opinions, and they express opinions when they feel empowered and valued, right? So, for example, here's some public meetings up top. You know, one was for budgeting priorities, right? So we gave everybody fake money, a certain amount of fake money, had all these boxes, and say, give these boxes money based on your priorities, right? Well, people are like, yeah, I have opinions about how money should be spent. You know, this one was directing, you know, where should development be directed? You know, we have to, what could accommodate density and actually contribute to the goals of our town instead of working against what we're trying to avoid. You know, down here, you know, there was a community garden day, you know, so you bring the process to where the people are, you know, and, you know, here was at the arts festival. Same thing. So, I mean, trying to engage people in conversations, don't create an us-them scenario, right, where it's just like, we're the experts, and you're going to come, and we're going to educate you, and then hopefully you'll be quiet. You know, no, this is, please, come be the experts that you are in what you know about, which will empower us to be the experts that we are in what we know about. And then, meet people, where else are they? Well, they're online, right? So, you know, it's pretty common in public process for people to say, we've got to have a project website, right? Well, here's the problem. Those project websites so often get orchestrated as an information clearinghouse. Right? We had a meeting, it had some materials, put them on the web. You know, there's a study that backs up what we've been telling people, put it on the web. Well, that is all information totally lacking in context. You're going to give people reams of complicated information and expect them to draw the conclusions that you want them to draw? That's insane. They're not going to do it. They're going to take your information and they're going to use it to prop up whatever lack of trust they already had. And they're going to turn that against you. So yes, by all means, make the information available, but a project website should be a narrative. It should have a narrative arc, just like telling a story, right? And so all information should be presented in context, right? You don't just put information up there for people to download. You tell the story of what happened at the meeting where that information was discussed, right? So this particular one, we were working at in Marana, Arizona. And one of the things we discovered about that context when we went out there is that they had invested a lot of work in developing their community brand, right? They were kind of savvy in that regard, and they had built the town brand and aligned themselves politically around their core benefits being kind of an innovative spirit and a town that valued lifestyle, right? So when we went in there, we're doing a land development code, right? We said, okay, well, this is what people value about their town. Then we need to tie it to lifestyle. We need to get people to realize that how they develop is going to have an impact on the way they live, right? They're there because you know, it's in the deserts, beautiful recreational opportunities, mountains, you know, everything. That's why they're there. So the conversation is not about redoing a code. The conversation is, how do we want to live? What are the development impacts on that? How do we mitigate those development impacts in the form of this code? Or, for example, this is Snellville, Georgia, near where I live, kind of a bedroom community, land of sprawl, right? But does have some political leadership that is trying to change that, trying to, you know, who is tuned in to the demographic changes happening in our country and trying to position the city for the future, you know, but not necessarily anything that the citizens are demanding at this time, right? So nobody is saying urban or anything remotely resembling urban. Nobody in Snellville wants to hear it, and nobody is going to say it. But what we figured out as we started to get to know this community is it's kind of like the kind of community where people watch a lot of HGTV, right? So we said, okay, well, these are people who are familiar with the idea that a house just runs its course, and then it needs to be updated. And that updating, a lot of things will stay the same. Some things will change to be brought up to date and modernized, and maybe some new amenities will be added. And so we said, well, that's essentially what we're doing with their code. So we'll frame it in the form of the development code renovation, and immediately puts it in context, because they see themselves as, oh, you're renovating, you sit down with your architect, he asks you how you live, and what you like about your house, and what you wish you wanted to change. And we're essentially doing that same process for the community, right? What do you like? What do you don't like? We'll update this, maybe some new amenities. Tell me what you want to do. And that's something that people can plug into. But the idea is that the project website then exists as it's a narrative that becomes an archival narrative. And I'm talking about how when you have a win and you set the right expectations and you deliver what you say you're going to do, well, then this kind of thing, over time, serves as a testament to validating that you did what you said you were going to do. And you can link back to that story, and you can reference that story, and that helps eliminate your baggage and build your personal assets. Now, the other thing that people often talk to me about all the time as it relates to being online is, you know, should we be using social media, and if so, how should we be using it? And again, even though it sounds like a cop-out, it's context-driven completely, right? Different communities behave online in different ways, right? Some communities, you go to their municipal Facebook page, and you know, if ever there's a comment, it's just some people saying yay. You know, something's happening, they say yay, they like everything, they feel pride in their community. And then you find other communities where it just went off the rails, and their social media in that community is filled with angry people venting, right? So you got to research this and figure out if there's an advantage into it. Because the thing I will tell you about social media, more than anything else in public process, is the tools that can be there to so efficiently connect you to more people in a shareable way to build momentum can be turned on you like that, right? The same tools can be used to crucify you, so don't take it lightly. That is the biggest point about social media is leverage it in ways where you are going to be empowering the generally reasonable people in the center and not throwing raw meat to the wolves at either end. All right, so this pretty much wraps up things. I'm going to make one last point because you know, some of the things I've said have kind of been at odds with what somebody from the community engagement industry would say. Because people who, you know, do moderation, conduct focus groups, that kind of a thing, really they see the end goal as a collaborative, consensus-driven utopia, right? You get to that, it's kumbaya. You know, they want to get to kumbaya, to go through, how do you engage people in such a way? And there's nothing wrong with that. And some communities actually do have the raw materials in terms of human capital to pull that off. You know, I've certainly worked in places where that happens. But, you know, the kumbaya moment where everyone has been listened to and everything was distilled into the perfect solution right in the middle, where everybody gives a little and gets a little, you know, that's rare. And to me, the end goal is not that. That's beautiful when it happens, but the end goal is to win, right? To do what you set out to do. All these passionate people that I meet in placemaking, right? I don't think anybody's doing them. It's like, well, we're going to do all this, but, you know, if it goes down in flames in front of the council at the end, whatever, you know, it's because the fun's in the doing it. No, right? The fun is not in the doing it. Well, it is, but you know, we're in this for a reason, and we're organic, so we have a limited time on this planet before we're history, and we want to get stuff done. So don't go into the process, you know, trying to get a hippie drum circle as your outcome. Your outcome is to get things done. And I don't say that as a way of minimizing the hippie drum circle, because, like I said, if people want to engage with you respectfully, by all means, you have to be respectful with them. That's how consensus emerges. But a lot of you are working in places where that just doesn't exist, and you still need to get things done. So, good luck. Kara asked me to ensure that there be an opportunity for people to ask questions if they needed to, so. Yes.
If you can come up to the mic, that would be great. Thank you.
First off, really enjoyed your presentation. My name's Chris, and I was wondering if you might give an example if you were in front of a city council or a planning board or a group that's a neighborhood group, and you're dealing with mostly reasonable people, but you get the one person who has been living in town for 5 generations, and their family farm has been run over by developers, and they have just an innate skepticism to everything you're doing. Can you give me an example of how you might handle that?
Well, for starters, what I've talked through today is essentially maximizing your the possibilities that that doesn't happen. Right? So it's not so much that I necessarily have one-to-one human techniques for dealing with somebody who doesn't want to be dealt with. That's not really my expertise. So, you know, I like you would wing it in that circumstance. But the point is to before that person gets to the meeting, to have gone through this process, so the chances of somebody being in your room who is irate is drastically minimized. That's what I'm trying to do. Just maximize your opportunities and minimize your pain. So I can't tell you specifically. Again, it's a situation that is completely context dependent, right down to the level of the level of respect for that person in the community. You know, some people are so negative in their interactions that they've already kind of lost their credibility. But other people are like pillars of the community and certainly need to be dealt with in a different way. So that's not really an answer, and I apologize, but that's kind of that's the context-dependent answer as it relates to my presentation.
Other questions?
I'm going to be lazy, but you can repeat it. I was just curious. I did see 2 websites you put up there, but I just wondered, are there communities, smaller communities in the U.S. that you consider great ones for best practices, or communities that have really nailed it with conversation between private-public sector or approaching development and change?
Yes, I wish she was asking about whether I had any best practice communities that I could reference in terms of places that have done it right. And I mean, because projects, you know, they pop up they drop off. It's not necessarily something that I retain, but perhaps the point to be made at is, you know, everything that I've talked about, you could do exactly right, and things could still go south. You know, there's no guarantees in that regard. But at least in my experience, I think small communities are often better, just because it's so much easier to treat people as a human being in smaller communities, because these relationships already exist. There's not a lot of facelessness that's associated with bigger communities. So.
Yeah, hi. Someone in our town came up with an alternative suggestion as a way to bring in some new people to the meetings, because it's usually the 8 to 10 hounds of hell who show up. And so what he was suggesting was that we use the same kind of process almost as a jury duty kind of summons, except that it wouldn't be mandatory, of course, and you wouldn't be like jailed or fined for not showing.
Right.
But it would be an opportunity to sort of reach out to a random selection of the population and say, look, we really do want to invite you to come and help us, you know, think about this new thing, you know. And I just wondered if you had heard of that kind of approach.
I haven't. My first question would be, in the community where you live, how do people typically feel about jury duty? Right? So that would be my first pushback. It's like, I'm sure you all have served, as have I, but you go there, and at least where I live, there's a moderator who welcomes everybody. You go in a giant auditorium, and then they divvy you up into trials or whatnot. But and that moderator always, they have a video, you know, with eagles in it, you know, to remind you of the valuable role you're playing in our judicial system and how critical that is. But most people don't enter the room thinking that. They enter the room thinking about all the things that aren't getting done at the office or with their kids or whatever. So that's not a yay or nay on that process, but that would be my first question about it, because maybe you work somewhere that has just a huge high civic spirit, and that could really fly there. So I don't know. Yes, Ivy.
Thanks, Scott. One other way that we've used that's sort of the opposite of the jury duty paradigm is the dinner party. We've done dinner parties where we invited a cross-section of people. We posted it as an open meeting. We fed them a fabulous meal. And I have to say that worked pretty well. So I offer that up. I mean, I'm sure other communities have done that.
Well, I mean, I agree with you. That's a good idea, and especially because it creates a context for conversation that people recognize as a human-to-human kind of respectful context for conversation, and I like that. I know a lot of communities find that people don't show up for any process unless you feed them. Maybe you live in some of these communities, but then other communities don't even have the budget to do that kind of a thing. So again, context. But yeah, I like the idea of making the conversation or making the gathering not about the outcome you're seeking, right? Maybe you're not trying to get people to come talk about the bike lane in specific, but instead you're trying to get people to come and have a congenial discussion about transportation and whatnot, and try to glean, because that's something people are like, I don't know how to design anything, but I do know what it's like to sit in traffic, and I'd be more than happy to tell you how I feel about that. So there you go. Anybody else?